very special presentation sponsored by St. Vincent Basilica Parish and by the Oblates of St. Benedict. We are grateful and blessed and honored to welcome Dr. Derya Little as our speaker. As she may mention in her presentation, Derya grew up as a Muslim in Turkey, and despite her family's poverty, she managed, by God's grace, to get a very good education. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in International Relations from a university in Ankara, Turkey, in 2004. Then received a Master of Arts degree in the history of the U.S. from another university in Ankara. And then she went to England, where she earned a PhD from Durham University. Since her conversion to the Catholic faith, Dr. Little has written 5 books and many articles in Catholic publications and has made many speaking appearances, including some on EWTN. So let us then, with joy and gratitude, open our hearts and minds to the voice of the Holy Spirit as we hear the witness of our special guest, Dr. Derya Little. Let us begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, we thank you for the many lavish gifts you have given us. We thank you for calling us to be baptized Christians and to come to know you deeper and more deeply through all the resources you give us. We thank you for bringing Dr. Little here to speak to us. May you open our hearts and minds and ears to what she has to say, so that we might experience an ever deeper conversion in the way of your Son in our daily lives. We ask you this through Christ our Lord. And Mary, seat of wisdom,
pray for us.
Saint Benedict,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you very much for coming today. And it's really apt that we're underground because even though we are all here in the light, we all start as tiny seeds because we are born into darkness. And I was reading, I looked at St. Benedict's rule last night, and he didn't mince words. As you know, he didn't want people to talk too much. And he talks about how a monk's life is a life of conversion. And even though he also mentions that conversion is when your life is directly changes path, it's also you continue to grow in the Lord, this ongoing conversion. And I believe my conversion started not long after as ours, as I was born. I grew up in Turkey, which is about 5,000 miles to the east. And in this small town, small in Turkish standards, it's a town that's mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Acts. It's the town of Iconium. Now we call it Konya. And St. Paul visited Iconium, and he got kicked out. And if he visited Iconium today, I'm afraid he would be kicked out again. My parents' faith, of course, became my faith. So maybe before we talk about Islam, I'd like to talk about how Turkey is. A gentleman asked me before how things are different in Saudi Arabia. Even though Turkey is a Muslim country and it's one of the most religiously homogeneous countries in the world, its identity is a little bit different than other Middle Eastern countries who are also predominantly Muslim. So at the end of World War I, modern Turkey's founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, decided that the Ottoman Empire eventually collapsed because they couldn't keep up with the times, especially as far as innovation and technology. So he wanted the face of the country to be turned towards the West instead of the East. So even though he saw the importance of religion as a social binder, he wanted to get rid of most of the outwardly expressions of Islam. So basically, once the World War I was over and War of Independence was won, he did all these reforms and made basically, at the force of by coercion, made Turkey look modern overnight. He said, you're not allowed to wear the Muslim garb anymore. So all women needed to be dressed like the Western women. The same goes for men. Of course, you can force people to change their religion overnight like that, but once he started to force people, the face of Turkey started to turn towards West. But the society in itself, the social structure remained very Muslim. So Turkey is a little bit of stuck in between the East and the West because of that. Like if you visited Istanbul today, I mean, there's a lot more, it's a lot more religious now than even when I left because of our current president. But growing up, I never see women wearing the full hijab. That just wasn't allowed. So that was the kind of country and culture I grew up in. So as a child, of course, what do I care about history, religion, or anything? You know, all I want to do is play outside and, you know, be with my friends and eat candy. So similarly, that's what we did. So in the winter, we would go to our state school, and we learned about secularism. We learned the French version, laïcism, where the state is above the religion and controls all religious activity, and technology and importance of innovation and education and all that stuff. Turkish women got the right to vote earlier than many European women. So we learned all about these good secular Western ideas, and then in the summer, all of us would get together in the neighborhood. The girls would wear our long sleeves, maxi skirts, and put our hijab on and go to the local mosque and learn how to read the Quran in Arabic. I don't speak Arabic. I grew up speaking Turkish, but the only way to read the Quran properly is to recite it in Arabic. That's the only way to please Allah. So that was my life. So it was kind of stuck in between. But at home, my parents were Muslims, but my father never really liked fasting or anything really physically hard. So I mean, definitely we were Muslims, and they wanted us to be more Muslims and more observant than they were. But my mother worked. She was a nurse, and she never wore the hijab, never covered herself. And she was a lot more observant than my father. Even though on the outside we look like this, you know, one boy, one girl, this perfect little family that, you know, that's been tried to introduce, you know, in the West as well. Like this, just everything is so happy when there's just four of you. But again, that Muslim culture, that the teachings of Islam that's been ingrained in the society for centuries was still there. For instance, my mother, she worked a full shift, and she had to come home and cook 3 courses of dinner for my father, and then do the cleanup. And on Saturday, we didn't have a washing machine, so she would have to wash all of our clothes by hand all day, clean the house, whatever needs to be done. And then on Sunday, we would go visit my paternal grandmother, and she would have, as a good daughter-in-law, she would then do all of her housework. And then come Monday, she would work. So now she was able to work, but she was really buried under this workload of being a mother, wife, and a woman who worked. On the other hand, my father, because remember, there is always a hierarchy in Islam, and it's not the hierarchy that we would understand as Catholics. So as a man, yes, he works all day, but he deserves to be served when he comes home. So he never helped with housework or anything. And also he loved ladies. So before how my life went back, I'd like to explain a little bit about St. Thomas. I'm sorry he's not Benedictine, but I think, you know, I think it's okay. St. Thomas talks about different kinds of fear, and not every fear is bad. So he talks about servile fear and filial fear. So servile fear is the fear a slave feels towards his master. So this fear comes only from the fear of punishment. Like when we say the act of contrition, we say if we are only confessing our sins because we fear hell, that's not perfect contrition, right? So because that's servile fear. And Allah's relationship with Muslim is exactly that. Allah is the master, the ultimate creator, the unreachable God who has no desire to have any relationship with us. So he is the ultimate master, and then the Muslim is nothing but a slave. Right? So that servile fear is ingrained in every Muslim from a very early age. Of course, you're not aware of it because it's like the fish. Are the fish aware of the water they swim in? Right? So, like as a little girl, we were always taught, you're not to think about, try to imagine how Allah would look like or how Muhammad would look like. These are beyond your mortal mind, and you would be in very big trouble. So I talk about this in my book in the beginning a little bit. I say, look, when I was a little girl, I think I was 6 or 7, because I was going to school, I tried to imagine Allah when I was laying in bed, and for about 10 seconds, so I imagined this like being with rainbow eyes and, the way little girls imagine things, and I was suddenly filled with fear because I tried to put him in my puny mortal mind, and I couldn't sleep from fear because I was so sure he was going to punish me for this, audacity. And the following day, I'm going to school, and I saw these big boulders next to the creek, our house, and I thought, those are little kids who tried to imagine Allah, and he turned all of them into boulders. So I remember this, to this day, that fear. And every Muslim child is raised with this fear, that she needs to know his place in the order. So what happens is the relationship between the creator and the creation trickles down to the society, right? So then the man is the master of women, and the elders are master of younger ones, right? So it's like this really selfish power-based hierarchy, unlike the hierarchy Christ preached. So not obvious, the hierarchy is not bad in itself, but as Catholics, we need to understand that there's a difference. So, and as opposed to servile fear, then there's filial fear, which is the second part of act of contrition. When I say, we disappointed you. I am contrite, I'm sorry because I disappointed you, Lord, and forgive me for this. That fear of disappointment. And that is the perfect contrition. So St. Thomas says, as every child of God, we should maybe start with servile fear, but then our growth is never complete unless that servile fear turns into filial fear. And in Islam, it never does. It's always that master-slave relationship. So again, going back, so that's how it was in our family. Even though everything kind of functioned perfectly, there was never that selflessness Christ preached. So my father, as I said, he liked ladies, and as a Muslim man, he was entitled to like other ladies. And even though in Turkey polygamy is illegal, a lot of men have wives or like mistresses on the side. And my father always cheated on my mother. But because he did it on the side, my mother kind of looked away, because we are also taught that men cannot help themselves. They can't control their sexual urges. So, so as long as he did it on the side, it didn't matter. So as we grew up, their marriage was strained, because as you can see, this is not a very good arrangement. And my father decided when I was around 11 that just having mistresses on the side wasn't enough. So he decided to have another wife with the religious ceremony. So my mother would be his legal wife, and the other one would be the religious wife. So that was the line my mother drew, and they got a divorce. And it was not a good divorce. It was a messy one. And up until then, I had never ever once questioned anything they had taught me. And the divorce completely shook the ground I was standing. And this is not because they're Muslims. We know it happens here. We know divorce really affects children. So I know it happens with Christian families as well. But for me, that was for the first time that the wall that servile fear built around me cracked. That was the very first time. And because you almost need, for that servile fear to be broken after it's matured for decades, you almost need a trauma. That trauma for me was divorce. And for many Muslims, it comes in the shape of a vision or a dream. You probably heard about this. Or suddenly they witness in Christians some things they never seen before, and that shakes. Like that kind of, it doesn't have to be a negative trauma always. But Muslims are not ever encouraged to doubt or question. Actually, doubting or questioning is like sinful in itself. And that could banish you to hell forever. Just questioning, just a simple act of doubting, like me, that little girl. Once you grow up in that fear. So that was the very first time. I was around 11, 12. I tried to pray, and I had this vivid sense of praying, and there was nobody listening to me. It's not because I never expected to hear back, because, who do you think you are that Allah would ever talk to you? But it was like I was talking to a wall. Like there was nobody behind that. My prayers went nowhere. And then that was the very first time I read the Quran in Turkish, because Islam is passed on by people who know, from elders, like from your grandparents, from your parents, from your imams. Nobody goes and reads the Quran themselves, and a lot of Muslims would argue that it's beyond your simple understanding anyway. But when I read the Quran for the first time and read Muhammad's life for the first time, I was really shocked. Because of that crack in my wall of servile fear, I was able to see who Muhammad was for who he really is. Because as a young Muslim, you're taught that Muhammad is Kamil Insan, the perfect human. Somebody every Muslim should imitate. You should be like Muhammad. He was sinless. He made some mistakes, but he didn't commit any sin. So when I read Muhammad's life, there are two very important things that struck me. First, as a woman, there was no way I could imitate him, right? Like when you read his life, because I wasn't a man, I could never be like him. I was born missing some parts. That would make me a good Muslim. And then you read the Quran and the Hadith, which is the life and the sayings of Muhammad, and you realize women are second class because that unbalanced, selfish hierarchy is always there, and the treatment of women and how you could have as many concubines as you want, whereas women don't have that right. Like there is this understanding that men and women are equal, not the same, but equal is a completely Christian idea. That we are all created in the image of God. It doesn't exist in Islam. Women are inferior, period. That was very hard. And we were also always taught that Muhammad never ever waged a war of aggression. And then you read their own accounts for themselves, and you're like, that sounds pretty much like a war of aggression to me. Nobody attacked you, and you go and attack their village, their tribe. Yeah, that is a war of aggression. You kill people, you execute people. And I was really shocked with how bloody the Muslim history was. Because all the versions you hear at school are all kind of nice, and like the Turks, the Ottomans were always right. We were righteous. It's the evil Christians, the Catholics. They worship the Pope, or all that stuff. That's what we were taught. And when I saw that, okay, this is not a man I can follow, and I turned my back to Islam. And of course, like in the middle of divorce, this came very easy, and I slowly fell into atheism. And I didn't ever question Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. I didn't ever consider, because in Islam you're taught that God sent Moses the Tevrat, which is Torah, and the Jews corrupted it. Then Allah sent Jesus, the New Testament, Injil, and the Christians corrupted it. And then finally Allah sent Muhammad, and then you can never ever corrupt Quran. I don't know. So in my mind, they were all exactly the same thing. And we were taught Christians, worship three gods, Father, Son, and the Mother, because that's what it says in the Quran. And it's just like, I had never questioned it. I don't know why. So I became an atheist. And there weren't any atheists around. So I found like a few others like me, and we kind of became these geeky atheists. Like, we would get drunk and play chess. Like, it's like this, and I'm so glad I didn't grow up in today's America. I would have definitely gotten into drugs or, something. But there, like, that was the worst you could do. You got drunk, that was bad. I mean, I was 12, of course it's bad, but not the worst it could have been. So anyway, so these friends of mine, we read all these books. We read like quantum physics and learned these chess moves, and I always lost because I was drunk most of the time. So this is the kind of way I started to lead, because the only moral compass I've ever had came from Islam. And if you don't have a moral compass, like, what do you care? So then I was of course depressed and all that stuff. So that's how I went, middle school, high school, and I went to college in Ankara. My father left, and he just he's getting married, other women, whatever he's doing. My mother became very depressed and withdrawn. And me and my brother, we kind of raised ourselves. And one of the things in Turkey, the family always pays their kids' way through college. But I had such a broken family, nobody paid, so I had to work, which isn't very common for college-age kids to work. So I'm like, okay, I'm looking for a job. I'm in Ankara. How can I find a job that can help me get through college and support me? So I was waiting at a bus stop. I saw this little flyer that said, American lady looking for a college girl who can speak English. My English wasn't this good, but I spoke it well enough. So I thought, what, with my luck, she already found someone. So I went about my way, and I went back home. Just like 10 at night, I wore my pajamas, and I'm sitting, watching TV, and I hear this voice in my head. It says, go get the number, go get the number. I'm like, stop it, it's 10 at night. Like, you don't go out at 10 at night, but he just won't quit. So I'm like, fine. So I got up in my slippers, pajamas, shuffled to the bus stop, wrote the number down, called this lady at 10:30, which is a big no-no in Turkey. And she's like, yeah, I haven't found anybody yet. Come on over. So I show up the following morning. So she opens the door. This lady, who is supposed to be American, but she's brunette. I'm like, what? All the Hollywood movies were wrong? You're supposed to be where is your cleavage, woman? Like, what is this? I mean, I kid you not, all my understanding of America, American culture, West, and, Christianity, Hollywood movies, not a good depiction. And, she was just like normal lady who was, trying to learn Turkish. She opens the door. Across her door, which should tell you a little about this lady. Across the entrance, this verse from the Bible is cross-stitched. It's a Muslim country. It says there is no salvation. It's Acts 4:12. There's no salvation under heaven except his name, by his name. I'm like, oh, great, she's Christian. Because people, I am 19, I have figured everything out. I wanted to save this woman from this delusion that is called Christianity. So anyway, so I go in, I feel very sorry for her, and I'm a militant atheist. Like, look, yes, I am miserable, but this is the truth, and truth is worth being miserable for. So it's like, I go in, and she's like, yes, let's give it a try for a few weeks. So the first session we start talking about is, I'm like, really? Are you really a Christian? Like, this is the conversation we started off, which, they say, don't talk about religion or politics. No. In Muslim countries, what else is there to talk about? This is the most important thing, your eternal destiny and, whoever is ruling you. Little did I know, this lady, I named her Therese in my book, which is funny because she's like a 5-point Calvinist. Like she cried when I became Catholic. It was not a good time. She was raised in an atheist house in America. She converted to Christianity when she was in college. And she went to Wellesley, the prestigious one. And she had a very good job in New York in the finance business, but she felt called to preach the gospel in Turkey, in a Muslim country. So comes over there, and she's like me, but the opposite, right? So for 3 years, her and I, every day, we talked about religion. And 3 years, twice a week, I met her, 2.5 hours a day. By the time I was done with her, I had read the whole Bible twice. I mean, that's how good she was. She's learning Turkish because, she wants to stay there. She still lives there. And I am so adamant that she's wrong. So for 3 years, we butt heads. And every time she comes up with an argument, I'm like, I'm sure there's a smarter atheist on the internet. So I go back and research stuff. And there's no smarter atheist because, usually atheists go for the straw man, the simplest, easiest argument, or they mock. Like, that's what I did. I sat around with my other atheist friends and made fun of religion. It's not like we really thought about it deeply once we kind of called ourselves atheists. Also, we are very smart. I mean, obviously, we have to be atheists. So for 3 years, this is what she did. She showed me a different God than Allah. And I understand that we need to form a dialogue with Muslims and don't open your lines with this. And I understand all that. But I think it's very important for Catholics to understand that the way Muslims describe who Allah is, the creator of the universe, is very different than the way the Catholics believe who God the Father is. It's so different that you cannot start from Allah and get to Christ. And then you have no salvation without him. So what the God she was talking about was pure, right? So in Islam, there is not a consistent teaching of sin, because if you say something is always sinful, that means you're limiting Allah. A thing is a sin because Allah says so. Does that make sense? Like, okay, so murder is sin today, right? If you can go kill your neighbor. Tomorrow, Allah may change his mind. That he says, you know what, it's okay, do whatever you want. And that's okay for Muslims to do whatever they want. A sin is not a sin, it's because it is not good for us, right? Like, God the Father he tells us not to do certain things because he's a jerk. He doesn't want us to have fun. No, he knows that ultimately it is not good for us. Physically, for our souls, emotionally, and all that stuff. So this person was talking about a God who is pure. That means he's unchanging. And he's like the ultimate standard of what good is. Like, it's a completely different understanding. And he's so big, he's above and over the physical world that science can function within. He's able to create a consistent world because he's pure good and consistent. Because one of the reasons science doesn't advance in Muslim countries is that it's like you can't have all of these expectations without a consistent God. But we expect God the Father to be always consistent, and we know that he wants to be known to us through nature. But Islam doesn't teach any of this. So like, this God that she was talking about was so different. And in a way, the God I knew as an atheist was like this puppet. But this God she mentioned was so much bigger than I was. But then I thought, okay, even if it's possible that there's a God, this is the most important thing in life, right? If there is truly an eternal life, our lives here are like that. I don't want to say it's nothing, but it's so fast. And if it decides our eternal destiny, then everything we do is so important. So I stopped. It's like, okay, would I want to believe in a God she talks about? But then I thought, well, what kind of a benevolent being lets so much evil happen in a world? So, the question of evil is, it causes many of us stumble to this day because we don't understand why we suffer, why there's so much evil. But as an atheist and a former Muslim, I didn't, again, have a good understanding of sin. And this is revelation, original sin and all that stuff. Remember, I was like, I am that seed in the darkness. Unless somebody comes and teaches me and tells me that there is light above the soil, you need to go towards the light, then I never know, right? Because I was born into darkness in original sin. And so I didn't have this understanding. So I was like, you know what, even if you're there, I don't want to believe in you, because even though you're omnipotent, you don't stop all this evil. So God sent me another American, again, in Turkey. I was taking this advanced English class, and so we had this professor, wonderful man, Buddhist, very anti-Christian. And hey, God can use anything, never lose hope. And so he assigned this chapter from this book called Brothers Karamazov. It's like this thick, written by Dostoevsky, who's a Russian novelist. And they say because of his and Tolstoy's novels, Christianity was preserved in communist Russia. And I believe it. It's just, they're beautifully written. But in this book, there are 4 brothers. One of them is becoming a monk, and the other one is really hardcore atheist, communist. And the older one, Ivan, is trying to convince the monk that what he believes is complete idiocy and stupidity. It's a way to control the masses, all the communist stuff. So the older brother tells this parable to convince the younger brother. It's very anti-Catholic, so bear with me. Even Tolstoy wasn't perfect. So God comes to earth. This is the parable the older brother says. It's not the second coming. Christ comes to earth during Spanish Inquisition. And he visits Spain. He's kind of walking around. He's checking things out. He's going to go back. And everybody recognizes him for who he is. He heals people, raises this one girl from dead, and he's like, everybody's kind of gathering around him. A cardinal from the Catholic Church, Grand Inquisitor, he sees this happening, and he sees the crowd Christ is gathering, and he also recognizes who he is. And then he tells his guards, go and put him in a dungeon. So his guard arrests Christ. Nobody says one word in protest. So at night, the cardinal goes to Christ and says, why did you come back? We have been trying to clean up the mess you made all those years ago. He says, you should have accepted the devil's offer in the desert. You wanted to give these men, you wanted to give humans heavenly bread, but all they want is earthly bread. All they want is food. They don't care about heavenly bread. All they want is security and safety. You wanted them to choose you freely, right? He doesn't ever force us. He's a gentleman. He whispers, we follow, and he speaks louder, but he will never force us to follow him. You wanted them to choose you freely, but all they're after is safety and earthly bread. You should have accepted the devil's offer and claimed your earthly kingdom, and that's what we are doing for you now. Again, I said it's very anti-Catholic, but hey. So I'm reading this chapter. It's long. It's an old translation from Russian to English. I drank way too much coffee and Turkish tea. And I have this thick dictionary in the middle of me, in front of me. It's 3 in the morning, and I'm thinking, that's me. That's the very first time I've ever thought about my own sin, right? Because I didn't have this understanding of sin, which you can see kind of in our secular world now. It's like, okay, a person becomes a rapist. So I'm very staunch atheist and communist around then. It's like a person becomes a rapist because society puts like unreachable expectations on him. So he has to suppress his urges, then he becomes a rapist. A person is a murderer because of some external force, right? There's never ever, I never understood that there's an inner force as well. That's one of the reasons a lot of people become communists, because if we can come up with the perfect system, then we can solve all the problems, right? Like, if we can come up with the political system, the economic system, if we put every piece is just right, we can bring paradise on earth. Which as Catholics, we know will never happen because we are all sinful and we are inclined towards sin without the grace of God. So I'm thinking there, look at my life. I've lived such a selfish life. I hurt so many people with my sins. And then I understand why there's so much evil in the world for the first time. It's not because of God. It's not because he's an evil God. It's because he wants us to choose him freely. And the cost of our freedom is an evil world. So that solved that problem. Yet that was my last intellectual question. The conversion is like it's again ongoing, consistent. But the Christian needs to surrender to God. It's not all up here, right? Up until then, it's been all these questions about God's existence, sin, and all problem of evil. But none of that matters unless you're ready to change your life, amend your life. Until you kneel before God and tell him that take my heart and give me a new one. None of that matters. So even though that was my last intellectual step, I didn't quite understand what it would mean to be a Christian. So this is the end of my sophomore year, and Therese came to America for a year. So I lost my job, and my boyfriend graduated, moved to a different city. I had to find another place to live and all that stuff. So I kind of started to get really occupied with worldly things. So I pushed this Christianity thing at the back. And then through, the Lord is just always he is always chasing us one way or another. We may not see it at the time. Then I start working for this another family who are also there to preach the gospel to Turks. But I started to work with their little kids. So I was teaching Turkish to their 4 and 6-year-old, or 4 or 7-year-old at that time, I don't quite remember. That was when I, for the first time, witnessed what a Christian family looks like. It's something I have never seen. This is why the witness of our families is so powerful. To us, it looks like a huge mess, but from outside, it looks beautiful. So it's like this was a husband and a wife. They loved each other so much that they couldn't, they wanted to serve each other all the time. This husband wasn't trying to rule over his wife all the time. And, he vacuumed every day. I mean, he was a little obsessed with the vacuum cleaner, but, right, it's like there was this heart of a servant in both of them. And they loved children, even they disciplined them, their love was so obvious. They disciplined out of love, whereas me and my brother, we kind of lied all the time get away from my mother because she would beat us really, really bad. So it was this thing I had never seen before. This joy and hope and love in their home was tangible. And I thought, surely nobody is like this. Surely they're faking it. I mean, can you imagine? I am 22 years old. I had never witnessed a good Christian life. And I couldn't leave their house. A few times they had to kick me out. They're like, it's kind of 11. I mean, your lesson ended 6 hours ago. They were so sweet. They wouldn't really kick me out. So I wanted to go back, but every time I went to my dorm room, I would, read the Bible more, and I had answered all the intellectual questions. But then I thought the thought of becoming a Christian was just so overwhelming to me. I don't know any Turkish Christians. What do? I don't want to be an, apostate, even though, as an atheist, everybody kind of whatever you can do. But becoming a Christian is a big deal. I was, once I finished college, I would have become a good, I would become one of the possibly ministers of the government. It was a very good university. All of that would go down because once you convert to Christianity, you're like a traitor to the state. And so there's kind of a soft persecution instead of like, yes, you're going to be, chased and killed. So like I couldn't make up my mind. So I go back to the Christian house, come back. It's like this torture. So I keep thinking about all these worldly things. So one day I wake up in the morning, I'm going to class, it's like 8:40 class, early in the morning, no coffee yet. And I'm walking, it's like a cool morning, October, years ago, 2002. And I saw this scene, and I am wide awake. I saw this scene of beautiful mountains in the back and a meadow, and a little girl sitting in the middle of the meadow wearing a white dress and looking down. And she's playing with these tiny little toys on her lap. You can't even see what she's playing with. A moment later, two hands come from the sky in this vision, which was very quick. And these hands are so big, you can't see above the wrist. Like they're big, the hands are bigger than the mountains. And they're handing this gift to this little girl who seems very insignificant compared to the hands, let alone the person. And this gift is so outworldly. It's wrapped in stuff, but it's like glowing and it's beautiful. It's clearly beyond anything this little girl can ever imagine. And she doesn't even see that this gift is being handed to her. And after a while, she finally sees, she looks up and she says, "No, thank you, I have these little things to play with." I'm like, are you stupid? How can you even compare that gift to your puny toys that you can't even see it in the vision. It's my vision, you can't even see the toys. And I'm like, oh, that's me. I'm thinking about what I'm gonna do in the future. I'm thinking about being the only Christian in Turkey and all that stuff. So I'm like, oh, yeah, that's me. Because I don't want to surrender. I don't want to accept the eternal gift. And that's the first time, as that seed who grew up in the darkness, that I broke the soil. That was the first time, but I needed that push many, many times. And I go to this family, the lady was washing the dishes, and I said, I think this is a good day to become a Christian. And she dropped the plates and all tears, and we said the prayer. They're all Protestants. Thank God for Protestant missionaries. It was like we said the prayer, great, and it turns out there are other Turkish Christians, there's still a growing church, and I become involved in the church. And one of the ministries I was involved in was me and a few other friends, we put together this teenage camp for Turkish Christians. It was the only one that served the entire country, and it was beyond the walls of Ephesus. It was just this beautiful. We had 150 teenagers every year for a week. It was great. And one of the peoples I worked with there was this kid who grew up in Turkey. He's American, his parents were Mennonite missionaries. He grew up here, and then he was studying the same subject I studied in Notre Dame. So we became very good friends over time. He finished Notre Dame, came to Istanbul, and I finished my undergrad, and I said, you know what, I'll just get my PhD and work at a private university. They don't care, as long as you learn to keep your head down. They don't care. So it's like I was getting my master's. So one day we went to a conference in Istanbul, and I had my agnostic roommate with me. So I'm like, you know what, his name is Anthony in the book. Between Anthony and me, we'll get her. So we went to lunch with Anthony. Anthony tells me, Derya, I'm going to tell you something, but don't be mad. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I became Catholic. No, you did not. I was surrounded by Calvinists, Baptists, and all those years of anti-Catholic bias. Like, you watch all Turkish movies, all the bad guys are Catholic. If somebody's wearing a cross, you know he's going to kill somebody. It's so anti-Catholic. And all the Catholic women, very loose. They just want to seduce all the good Muslim guys, and there's one virtuous Catholic woman who converts to Islam at the end and marries the Turkish hero. So it's like, all this stuff, plus Baptists who think like Therese, who the first lady I taught, he told me that the Catholic Church was the whore of Babylon and the Pope was the Antichrist. I mean, so this is the stuff I am surrounded with. Not that I know anything about Catholicism, but this is what you're hearing. And he was like, and we started fighting about saints and all this stuff, and my roommate, who we were gonna get, we were gonna convince to become Christian, she's like, hey, I should have brought popcorn. Look at the Christians having at each other. So we couldn't come to a conclusion. Andrew and Anthony and I couldn't. Anyway, so I go back to Ankara. There are a few things that always bothered me in the Protestant theology, but I always push them aside because I clearly don't know enough, So it's like, okay, I probably don't understand. So one of them was sola scriptura. I didn't understand how a God who would become human for us, die for us, not know us enough to leave us with some authority. Right? It didn't make sense. What did Christ say? Hey, hang in there. In a couple of 100 years, I'll send a book over, but don't kill each other until then. You look at the book of Acts, St. Paul and St. Peter are already fighting. So he knew to leave, he should have known to leave authority behind. So, okay, I don't understand that. Sola Scriptura doesn't make sense because there wasn't any Bible, nobody could read. And what happened all those years when nobody could get Bibles? That didn't make sense. Only faith didn't make sense because once we said the prayer, does that mean we didn't have free will anymore? Suddenly God took all our free will, we couldn't sin or offend him anymore, right? We had no cooperation in the matter. That didn't make sense, I pushed it aside. So all these things. So I go back to Ankara. We have this really huge library in this university. And I was like, I go to the library, I was like, I'm gonna prove all those Catholics wrong. I am, 24 at this time. I didn't know anything at 19, but at 24, obviously I know everything. It's been a whole 5 years. So I go to the library, and there's one book on Catholic theology. And it's written by this guy named Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger. And I pulled it out, it says, it's Introduction to Catholic Theology. It's this thick. It's not an introduction, no. So I open it, I'm gonna prove this guy. And nobody told me he was the Pope, right? I am that clueless about what's going on in the Catholic world. So I open it, and I couldn't even understand the introduction of the introduction. So I'm like, okay. So I close it and put it back respectfully. So I go back to my dorm room, and Anthony had sent me another book by this guy called Mark Shea, who was an evangelical and became Catholic. So Mark Shea has this little book called By What Authority, and he takes all the Catholic beliefs and looks into the scriptures and tells them that, hey, Catholics actually like the Bible. So, and then I also, in that tiny, tiny book, I see that all my questions are answered in the Catholic Church about the Bible and the faith, and all my questions were answered in that tiny book, and everything suddenly made sense. And then I chased down, this is a city of 5 million. There are 2 Catholic churches. One is on French embassy soil, and the other one is on Vatican embassy soil. So the only one I could have, get the number for was on the French embassy soil, and I kind of kept calling them, but they don't openly evangelize because, the government will kick them out. So finally, this priest that I'm trying to talk to, he picks up the phone, and he has awful Turkish. He's like, why are you harassing my people? I'm like, I want to become a Catholic, I don't know what to do. I can't talk to anyone. I'm working for a bunch of Southern Baptists. All my friends are anti-Catholic. I was like, I need to talk to a Catholic. So he's like, okay, I'll give you 15 minutes. So I show up, this guy, poor 85-year-old French Jesuit, a good Jesuit, and he had just moved to Turkey 3 months ago. So he has a little bit of Turkish, he's French, and a little bit of English. And I have Turkish, English, and a little bit of French. So it's between 3 languages, he decides after 15 minutes that I am not a crazy person, or at least a government agent, whatever. So that's when I received my first introduction to Catholicism, an introduction I can actually understand. And then I moved to England for my PhD, and I was confirmed into the Catholic Church then. And it still keeps growing. Like that was the very first conversion, was after that vision. And I broke the soil, but like I was a sapling, and I had to come to know the fullness of the Catholic Church, and I grow and grow. And as Saint Benedict says, this growth can never stop until we die. So we keep growing, and I hope, pray that daily I keep growing. So thank you very much for listening. Father asks if I brought anything positive from Islam to Catholicism. Yes, of course. There is goodness and beauty and truth in everything. And so there is some in Islam. And I think in Islam they capture that reverence that's due to God the Father. You go into a mosque and it's like beautiful, it's majestic, and it's wonderful. When I go to a good, like, beautiful Catholic church, I feel that sense of majesty, and I also love their devotion. We kind of lost our sense of praying constantly. Like they pray 5 times a day, and they got that idea from the liturgy of the hours, and they are very adamant that they're fasting and offering all these sacrifices out. So there's a lot too that we can imitate in a Muslim's devotion to Allah, because our God deserves the same devotion, He wants to be in commune with us, and He will answer. So there's a lot that we can learn from Muslims, and that's a good starting point. Don't start with we don't believe in the same God, it's not, but that kind of a similar devotion, especially for Catholics, is a great beginning point. Yeah, do you do this? Yeah, we go to church every Sunday, and it's like an obligation. It's not like, hey, I feel like going. Oh yeah, we fast a month a year, like you do. It's a little different, but so yes, there's much in common ground there. And as far as the morals goes, in the secular world, the Muslim morality we can use to create a dialogue to preach the good news to Muslims better. Like we can find a common ground in the case of abortion or euthanasia and all that stuff. They don't believe in any of those. So yes, there's much in common. We just need to be looking for it. He asked if there are more women becoming Christians because of the equality. There is more, and the thing is, in Turkey, at least I can speak for Turkey, and I think this may be true in other Muslim countries too. Protestants are a lot more active, and their form of worship, which is a lot more informal, I think attracts more women, whereas the Catholic liturgy attracts more men, because I think men are more attracted to that sense of this is a God bigger than us. So I would say not many would become Christian because there's equality, because I think that's like a second step you learn. Does that make sense? I think a lot of women become Christian because they feel that emotional connection with Christ, and many of them have visions of Christ. Like this one lady and her husband, they just got baptized in Egypt, and she was a very devout Muslim. And she was having all these doubts about Muhammad, and as she read the Quran, she speaks Arabic, so as she read it, recited it, she had all these questions, and she prayed to Allah. She said, I really don't want to have these doubts. I know they're simple in your mind. Please send me a vision of Muhammad so I can once and for all get rid of this. She goes to sleep, and she fasts all day. She goes to sleep, and she has a vision of Christ with Our Lady. So, here you ask for a vision, because so you hear all of these stories a lot. I talked to this guy on the phone. He was running from his tribe because he was the sheikh of the religious leader of his tribe, and he had this really bad infection on his leg that basically claimed his life, and he fell asleep, and somebody touched in his dream and healed his leg. And he thanked Muhammad, and he said, no, I am Jesus Christ, son of Mary. And then he wakes up, the leg is healed, and he's obviously can't say no. He converts, he's on the run and all that stuff. But so does it make sense? So you kind of need this like personal encounter, and you hear it a lot. The matters of equality, it's kind of next step. So it's not in the forefront necessarily, but the next step. It doesn't. No, it's. I don't think I brought any copies. My husband and we started going to Latin Mass last year because mostly my heart is very proud still, and at the Latin Mass I feel maybe it's part of the being grown up as a Muslim. I feel that majesty and worship, and they have a great catechism program, and we have 4 kids. Anyway, so we just created, my husband and I created that guide for absolute newcomers to Latin Mass, that if you've never been to Latin Mass, so you're not like, am I in a different planet? Is this the same map? You know, so it's like, it has pictures and stuff. It's going to be published by Angelica Press next month, so it's not available online, but get a copy. And it has pictures on it and places to draw pictures too. So it's not related to the story, but it's part of the ongoing growth, right? Like now we are trying to pass the faith on to our children, and what's the best way to do it, and we've decided that is the best way for our family. You know, when I read through the Old Testament before she asked, I'm sorry, if the God of Old Testament felt like more like Allah, as many atheists claim. When I read the Old Testament before my conversion, no, I did not get that sense, but I see where they're coming from, because again, all of our lives belong to Him. He holds the universe in existence. So if there's anybody who can lay claim our lives, it's God, who, you know, created us. So I understand, but I think most of the atheists have no idea what's happening in the Old Testament, how the Lord used our sinful nature, Israel's sinful nature, and all those other nations' sinful nature to bring about His salvation. So I think there are a few books. I think Trent Horn has a really good book on it, and I can't remember his name, who, The Myths About, I think it's a Catholic Answers book, who answers all those. Look, you know, God, it doesn't say that God told people to necessarily go kill everybody. If they had killed everybody in the next chapter, why do we have all the members of this tribe show up? It's more like, you know, we destroyed them, you know, it's just a warlike bragging. So I think most of the atheists, when they claim that we can always come back and find answers, but as Catholics, we really need to learn our faith better. We always need to be prepared, and we also need to say, look, let me get back to you on that, because yeah, I never thought about that. You're right. Let's go and maybe read it together, you know, because most atheists just don't quite understand how deep Catholic theology is. If there's a question that you have, I'm sure somebody has already answered it. Father asked how I deal with militant Muslims. I have never received a death threat. Like, I'm not, you know, that well known yet, thanks be to God, I suppose. But I have talked to many Muslims over the internet, because especially after EWTN, which I didn't know it reached all over the world. I talked to many people from Indonesia and Middle Eastern countries who can't really go out and find a Catholic church and talk. Most of them are actually, they're very Muslim. They have questions. They want to stay Muslim. Does it make sense? So, like, if they're reaching out to a Christian, either they're really missionary, or they're actually questioning their own faith to learn more about Islam. Like the most recent, I'm talking to this Turkish guy. He's so sure that Catholics worship Mary. I'm like, I think we'd know if we worshipped Mary, you know. But he is so sure. Like, look at this. You say she was taken up into heaven. I'm like, so God can't do it? So if they're militant, I mean, if there's a death threat, I will just block them and it will be online, which I didn't have any of that. I think I just try to use it to talk about the faith. It's an opportunity, and, you know, it's easy on the keyboard, not face to face. So, well, since Christians corrupted the Bible, you cannot trust their account of who Jesus is. Most of them deny crucifixion. When I was a kid, I was taught. I'm sorry. The question is that how do they compare the account of Jesus and Muhammad, because they are so different. Sorry. Like as a kid, I was taught that Allah replaced Jesus on the cross with Judas, right? So because he would never let his prophet die so brutally. There's a book by a guy called David Pino. He teaches somewhere in California, but his book is called The Crucifix on Mecca's Front Porch. Wonderful book. He gives the background to Muhammad's life, and he talks about how Muhammad identified most with Jesus as a prophet, because Muhammad started very peaceful if you read his life, and then he kind of became very volatile and aggressive after the Hijrah, when he moved from Mecca to Medina, and he couldn't handle the idea that he may end up dead like Jesus. Because, like, why not? You know, prophets get killed all the time. Nobody wants to listen to Allah. But that's one of the accounts. So you cannot trust what Christians say about Jesus, and they will adamantly deny it. There's a convert. He passed away. Nabil Qureshi. And he had to deal with all these questions because his roommate, a convert to Christianity, he answered, like, show me where the Bible was changed. And like these simple questions, because everybody will say the Bible was corrupted and changed, and he was like, how was it changed? Show me where is it wrong? And once you start asking those questions, they're like, that's one of the ways you can also, like, tell me what is wrong. Tell me where it was changed. Also, can you tell me a little more about Quran? When was it put together? Why does this verse challenge this verse? Or, you know, so, but that's how they see Jesus, just as a prophet, right? That's the same in Sunni. Like a Muslim girl can never marry a Christian guy, but a Muslim man can take a Christian wife, because, you know, again, the men are over the woman. That's the same idea. No, I mean, there's conversions. You know, we had many converts from Islam who were men. It's just different in Turkey, and it depends where you grow up. Like in a more, if you go more towards the Middle East and towards the east of Turkey, like, more than likely you will go into a house arrest. You could be killed. You probably won't be accepted by your family. Most of them hide their conversion. I was lucky because I had such a broken family. I mean, I hate to say it. Actually, my conversion, which I talk about it in the book, it brought my family back together, because I would have never had any relationship with my parents. So, like, I was blessed in that. But while I lived in Turkey as a Christian, a Catholic priest was murdered as he prayed before the altar. A bishop was murdered. 3 Protestants, their throats were slit just because they were selling Christian books in the southeastern part of Turkey. So there's hard persecution, not as bad as Saudi Arabia, but I never felt like living in Turkey that my life was threatened. But you're under the constant gaze of the government. Like at every church service, every mass, there's like a plainclothes police officer. He sits there, reads his book, and you know, we bring him tea, and you know, he knows us. They know the name of every Christian in the whole country. So, but it's not as bad as Saudi Arabia, thanks be to God, for men and for women. Thank you very much. Thank you.